She was known as Miss Unsinkable, the queen of sinking ships and the woman who lived. Her name was Violet Jessop, and she survived not one, not two, but three of the most famous maritime disasters of the 20th century. How did she do it? What was her secret? And what did she learn from her extraordinary experiences? In this video, we will explore the life and times of Violet Jessop, the woman who faced death at sea 3 times and lived to tell the tale. Violet Jessop was born in Argentina in 1887, the daughter of Irish immigrants who became sheep farmers. Her childhood was marked by illness and hardship. She contracted typhoid and tuberculosis, the latter of which nearly killed her. But she recovered miraculously thanks to her strong will and deep faith. After her father died, she moved to England with her mother and siblings. To support her family, she followed her mother's footsteps and became a stewardess on ocean liners, serving the wealthy and the famous. In 1910, she joined the White Star Line, the company that owned the most luxurious and prestigious ships of the day. She was assigned to the Olympic, the largest and fastest ship in the world at the time. She enjoyed her work, but soon she would face her first brush with disaster. On September 20th, 1911, the Olympic was sailing from Southampton to New York when it collided with a British naval cruiser, the HMS Hawke, near the Isle of Wight. The impact caused severe damage to both vessels, but fortunately, no one was killed. The Olympic managed to return to port while the Hawke was towed away. Violet Jessop was among the crew members who stayed calm and helped the passengers during the emergency. She later wrote in her memoir, "I had only one thought, to do my duty and stick to my post." The Olympic was repaired and returned to service, but Violet Jessop soon transferred to another ship, the Titanic, the sister ship of the Olympic and the most famous ship in history. She was one of the few crew members who had worked on both vessels. She boarded the Titanic on April 10, 1912, as a stewardess for the first-class passengers. She was looking forward to a new adventure, but she had no idea what fate had in store for her. On April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and began to sink. Violet Jessop was ordered to help the women and children into the lifeboats. She later wrote in her memoir, "I was ordered up on deck. Calmly, passengers strolled about. I stood at the bulkhead with the other stewardesses, watching the women cling to their husbands before being put into the boats with their children." As the situation became more desperate, Violet Jessop was finally given a place in a lifeboat. She was handed a baby to look after and told to be a good girl. She later wrote in her memoir, "As the lifeboat was being lowered, an officer shouted, 'Here, Miss Jessop, look after this baby,' and a bundle was dropped into my lap." Violet Jessop and the baby survived the night and were rescued by the Carpathia along with about 700 other survivors. The rest of the Titanic's passengers and crew, more than 1,500 people, perished in the icy waters. Violet Jessop later wrote in her memoir, "I was still clutching the baby against my hard cork lifebelt I was wearing when a woman leaped at me and grabbed the baby and rushed off with it. It appeared that she put it down on the deck of the Titanic when she left and then forgot it." Violet Jessop returned to England, where she was greeted by her mother and the press. She was hailed as a heroine, but she also suffered from nightmares and trauma. She later wrote in her memoir, "I could not forget the awful scene of the sinking ship, the cries of the drowning, and the faces of my friends and colleagues who had gone down with the ship." Despite the horror of the Titanic, Violet Jessop did not give up her life at sea. She continued to work as a stewardess for the White Star Line and later for other companies. She also volunteered as a nurse during World War I, serving on hospital ships that transported wounded soldiers from the front lines. She was assigned to the Britannic, the third and last sister ship of the Olympic and the Titanic. The Britannic was converted into a floating hospital, with red crosses painted on its hull and funnels. On November 21, 1916, the Britannic was sailing from Naples to the Greek island of Lemnos, where it was supposed to pick up more patients. It was passing through the Care Channel, a narrow strait in the Aegean Sea, when it hit a German mine and exploded. The blast tore a huge hole in the ship's side, and water rushed in. The Britannic began to sink faster than the Titanic in less than an hour. Violet Jessop was having breakfast when the explosion occurred. She ran to her cabin and grabbed her prayer book and toothbrush, remembering her regret of not having one after the Titanic. She then went to the deck and helped the wounded into the lifeboats. She later wrote in her memoir, "I leapt into the water and struck out for a bit of wreckage. As I did so, I saw the ship take a fearful plunge, her stern rearing hundreds of feet into the air, and then came down with a thundering crash." Violet Jessop was in the water, surrounded by debris and bodies. She was in danger of being sucked into the Britannic's propellers, which was still spinning. She later wrote in her memoir, "As I came to the surface, I was nearly killed by a falling lifeboat. I was pushed under the water by some people struggling near me. I was also hit on the head by an oar. I thought I would drown, but then I felt a hand grab my hair and pull me up." Violet Jessop was rescued by a lifeboat and later by a British destroyer. She was among the 1,036 survivors of the Britannic. The rest of the ship's crew and passengers, 30 people, died in the sinking. Violet Jessop later wrote in her memoir, "I was bruised and battered, but otherwise unhurt. I thanked God for sparing my life once again." Violet Jessop survived 3 of the worst maritime disasters of her time, but she never lost her love for the sea. She continued to work as a stewardess and a nurse until her retirement in 1950. She lived a quiet life in the countryside, where she wrote her memoirs and tended to her garden. She died in 1971 at the age of 83, leaving behind a legacy of courage and resilience. Violet Jessop was a remarkable woman who witnessed history and defied death. She was a survivor, a hero, and a legend. She was Miss Unsinkable, the queen of sinking ships, and the woman who lived.